Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Health Babes podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Becky Campbell with Dr. Crystal Hone. Today, we have Dr. Kirk Parsley on the show. He used to be a Navy SEAL who then became a medical doctor, and he really specializes in sleep. We talked so much about all the different ins and outs of sleep, the different stages of sleep, REM sleep versus deep sleep, how important sleep is for children, the effect of alcohol on your sleep, the right amount of sleep to get, really anything you can think of, we hit it. So I loved this episode. We hope you love it too. Hey everyone, let's welcome Dr. Kirk Parsley to the show. We're so excited to have you. We've been following you for a really long time and we love everything you talk about, and we've listened to on other podcasts and you're just so great. So we're just so excited to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm flattered. I appreciate the opportunity. I don't have the work ethic to have my own podcast, so I appreciate the soapbox anytime anybody gives me one.
I love
Well,
it.
you have an amazing story. So can you kind of talk to us about how you got into the medical field and this work specifically?
Yeah, sure. So, it kind of important to the backstory. I joined the military right out of high school. I went into, I didn't even really know what a SEAL was, but they just kind of become this popular kind of news media kind of interest around these the toughest training in the world. And so, I thought I was the toughest kid in the world. So I wanted to go be the tough, like I wanted to do the toughest training in the world. I didn't even really know what a SEAL was myself. And I just said, like, whatever, I want to go do the training. And so I did that. I made it through SEAL training. And then I spent 6 years in the SEAL teams. I did 3 deployments, but that was all pre 9/11. So, nothing compared to the guys now with the beard and all the equipment and like, all that combat experience. Like that's not me. We were kind of like, we call them the Hollywood SEALs. We just had a really fun time
Oh,
doing all these hobbies, skydiving and scuba diving and rock climbing and shooting and blowing things up. And like, it was a great place to spend your youth. Um, and then, I fell in love, wanted to get married. I got out of the military, got married, started college, not really sure what I was going to do. But I thought maybe physical therapy school. So I started going to get my physical therapy hours in. You need 2,000 hours just to apply to physical therapy school. I don't know if you know that, which is like, yeah, that's a year of full-time work or 2 years of part-time work. So I was like, well, I better start getting going on it. So I started doing that at San Diego Sports Medicine Center while I was in college. And I pretty quickly decided I didn't really want to be a physical therapist. It just felt like it was a little too algorithmic and I don't know, mechanical for me. Like, I wanted more free reign and creativity and thought and all that stuff. So, a couple of the doctors there talked me into going to medical school, which I resisted very heavily because I dropped out of high school. I mean, I wasn't even close to graduating high school. But one of the doctors came out and said, the question isn't, could you get into medical school? The question is, would you want to go if you got in? I
yeah.
was like, of course I'd want to go. And he was like, well, then you got to try, don't you? So I did well enough in college to get into medical school. And way back then, pre-internet, you had to go to the bookstore and get the Kaplan Review book and figure
Oh,
out what
yeah.
medical school you were competitive for. And the going knowledge was, apply to 20 schools, hope you get 5 interviews, maybe you'll get into two or 3 schools, and like that would be ideal. And so when I was looking at the Kaplan Review book, I realized that the military had their own medical school, and I didn't know that. But I was already married, I already had a kid, I already had another kid on the way, and I was like, kind of makes it obvious I should, like, they're going to pay me, I can support my family to go to medical school. So I went to the military's medical school, figuring I would get a chance to go back to the SEAL teams and kind of give back to the community that shaped me. And I did. And when I got back to the SEAL teams as their physician, I was, because I'd spent all of college working in a sports medicine center, and then I'd spent the first 5 years of my medical education focusing on orthopedics. And so I was really well steeped in sports medicine and orthopedics.
Mhm.
Um, but the SEALs already had tons of experts from all over the
Yeah.
world that they had hired to do all of that, and that's not what they needed me for.
Mhm.
Um, and so I ended up in like this supervisory role. When you're the dumbest guy there, they make you the supervisor, and they're like, you just supervise because like we don't have anything for you to do, so you sit up front and act like you know what's going on. And SEALs are a lot like professional athletes in that
Mhm.
they the worst thing you can do for them is put them on the bench, take them out of their job, right? So they usually don't tell doctors the truth
Mhm.
because the doctor can disqualify them. So a lot of times they lie to their doctors and then they go out in town and they find a doctor to do what they need to do and they pay them out of their own pocket. So that
Yeah.
and SEALs don't make a lot of money. So it's a big commitment for them to do that. But because I had been a SEAL and I had a good enough reputation as a SEAL, obviously that the guys trusted me. They came in and started telling me their problems.
Wow.
And they didn't have disease. Like I had a great education on how to recognize and treat disease. I didn't have any education on how to make somebody healthier or make somebody perform better. Like that wasn't even talked about. That wasn't even a concept in medicine.
Right.
But that's what they needed from me. So one of the things that it took me several months to have any idea. They all came and complained about the same things, which has now been written up in the literature by some researchers who basically validated everything that I was seeing there. And they now I was calling it the SEAL syndrome. They now call it operator syndrome.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it's basically, um, it's basically 20 to 30 years of age added onto you. Like that's really what it
Wow.
is, right? So
Yeah.
they break it down into different categories. There's emotional and cognitive and physical and metabolic and all that other stuff. But basically, you lose confidence, you lose concentration, your emotional control goes away, your mental focus goes away, your mental clarity, your memory, like all that stuff starts declining as if you were getting older. They're eating what the nutritionist is telling them to do and working out the way the exercise physiologist is training them to do it. And their strength and conditioning coaches training them, and they're getting fatter and they're getting weaker and they're getting slower. And they're SEALs, so they're like, well, maybe I'm just getting old, and maybe that's the
Right.
problem. I'm like, yeah, brother, you're 32. I mean, you might as well just like go jump off a bridge now. I mean, you're old right now, and and really you kind of got to be 32 to be really valuable as a SEAL because it takes, 10 years to be good enough at that job to be really valuable.
Mhm.
Um, and so they were kind of hitting a wall there, and they were having some they're having some erectile issues and sex
Mhm.
drive issues and just kind of like think of them as a 7-year-old man instead of a 30
Yeah.
deal,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of the way they're performing. But if you look at them, I mean, they're jacked, they're
Right. In
they look
shape.
like amazing athletes. They look
Right.
super fit. And so I just started testing everything I could possibly think to test because I didn't even have a guess. I was just like, yeah, I've heard of shell shock and combat fatigue you hear about in other wars, and they've been at war now for 8 years. So I'm like, well, maybe it's something to do with that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what those things were, but at least I had something to to go. Well, maybe similar to that. Maybe we can figure it out now. And kind of one of the first things that I figured out was that they were all using sleep drugs at that time. The Z drugs had been out for probably 8 years at that point. So things like Ambien and Lunesta. And the knowledge in the medical community, of course, because the medical education system is designed and dominated by the pharmaceutical industry, it was thought that, well, Z drugs, like no side effects whatsoever.
Right.
It's like taking aspirin. I mean, safer than aspirin. You just take it's no problem. Um, and I didn't know any better.
Mhm.
But fortunately, they had been recently sued. Ambien had been sued. Uh, and when they get sued, they have to give up all their research. When they apply for FDA approval, they just give the FDA what they want that supports their case, and they hold on to everything else. When they get sued, they have to show everything. So they knew it didn't work. They knew what the side effects were. They knew that it caused all sorts of problems and broke people down. And one of the most important things is that all of your hormones are regulated while you're asleep, right?
Right.
And primarily in deep sleep. But then all of your emotions and cognition and learning, that's all happening during REM sleep. So when you take sleep drugs, you're decreasing REM by about 80% and you decrease sleep by about 20%. And because they're seals, if one is good, two is better, three is great, so
Yeah.
they're
Mhm.
overdosing on it. And then chasing that down with a couple of beers or cocktails, whatever. And when you drink alcohol, the exact opposite happens. You lose 80% of your deep sleep and 20% of your REM sleep. So
Right.
when I did sleep studies on them, they had 99.9% stage two sleep, which is just
Wow.
considered transitional sleep, which is not deep and not REM. And so we think all the benefit, or the vast majority of the benefit, really comes from deep and REM. And so once I figured all of that out, and I mean, this wasn't something that took weeks. I mean, this
No, for
took
sure.
months for me to figure out, and then
Yeah.
years to get really good at. Um, but what we figured out is, okay, well, all of your anabolic activity. So anabolic, think of it like putting on muscle, anabolic steroids. We think of that. So taking small, simple things and building big, complex things, like turning amino acids into muscle. That's anabolic. Catabolic is the opposite. So if you're starving, you haven't eaten in days, your body turns your muscles back into amino acids because all your cells need amino acids. So that's breaking it down. So the most anabolic time in any 24-hour period is when, by definition, you have the lowest catabolic activity going on in your body, right? Well, stress hormones are catabolic.
Hmm.
Things like growth hormone and testosterone and thyroid and insulin, these are all anabolic hormones. So during deep sleep, all of your anabolic hormones are being reset for the next 24 hours. So if you get a bad night's sleep and that doesn't work well, you have bad hormones for at least the next 24 hours till you sleep again.
Yeah.
Deficient hormones or unbalanced hormones. And then, like I said, REM is when you will rehearse every single thing that you've thought of, everything you've done, every experience you've had. If you had a fight with your spouse about dirty dishes in the sink, that should be a non-issue, right? Like that the emotions around that should be gone within 3 minutes of that argument, right? But if you don't sleep well and you don't emotionally categorize, that might be a really big trigger that maybe that means we aren't compatible and we should start calling divorce attorneys. So it can get really ridiculous. And we think this is one of the things that goes on with PTSD because so many people after a severe head trauma or very emotional event, they run into poor sleep, and now they don't emotionally categorize because they're not sleeping well, and so that event becomes more and more disturbing. And also during REM sleep is where you're taking everything that you learned, everything you've heard, and you're comparing it to other stuff that you know, and you're forming connections between information you already know. And the more connections you can form, the more durable that new information is, the more you actually learn that, right? So if you maintain like you hear a fact and you put it in your brain, um, that fact is there to some degree, but you don't really know anything about it. It's just like it's a fact in your head. But once you've thought about it in relation to 12 other things and you've formed all these connections, you can think about that one piece of information from 12 different ways. And now you really know something, right?
Yeah.
What's going on during sleep. And so they weren't getting any sleep. But just back out of what I told you, the SEAL syndrome was, right? Okay. So
Right.
emotions,
Mhm.
cognition, mental focus, memory, like that's all sleep. And then they're getting fatter, slower, colder, and weaker, although they're working. Well, that's all anabolic hormones, right?
Right. Right.
So that was a big one. And so it turned out there were some other things to work with. Obviously, chronic pain was an issue, chronic
Oh,
inflammation
for
was an issue,
sure.
and chronic brain inflammation from lots and lots and lots of mild to moderate TBIs. Um, but the biggest thing by far was sleep. And so
Yeah.
um, at first, I got mocked and laughed out of everybody's office when I
Oh,
told
for
them,
sure.
hey,
They minimized it, right? Sleep
well,
minimizers.
no, yeah,
No.
nobody was talking about this at that time.
Yeah.
And they literally thought that I was
Crazy.
probably just dumb. Like I somehow had skated through medical school and
Yeah.
but really a dumb guy because I thought hormones were related to sleep. And everybody knew
Right.
that wasn't true. Like, what
Yeah.
are you talking about? It has no core. Like, what are you talking about? Those two aren't associated at all. Now everybody knows that. You
Mhm.
go on social media, like there's 500,000 people writing about that every day, but no one had heard about that at the time. And so I got them with the SEALs. So the SEALs helped me do all of this. They're great patients because they
They're
want to get better.
disciplined,
Like
right? Discipline. Yeah.
performance is their goal, and they are disciplined as hell. And they will do anything to be better at their job because they die if they're not the best at their job, right? So there's a lot of motivation in that.
Yeah.
And they trusted me and they wanted to get better. So we worked hand in hand to figure all of this out. And when I wanted to get them off of sleep drugs, I had to come up with something. I couldn't just say, they're taking sleep drugs because they can't sleep. So I can't just say, quit taking those and sleep anyway. So so slowly, like one ingredient after another, we kind of worked up this combination of 7 different supplements that I just found through like general medicine, things you'd find on PubMed and Cochrane database. Like it wasn't anything revolutionary. I just combined sort of all of them, like everything that was associated with sleep. And I could understand why it was associated with sleep and that a nutritional deficiency and that would cause problems. We added that. And then over the course of a few months, testing with a couple of hundred guys giving me feedback, we figured out how much of each we needed and which brands were the best. And in the SEALs, if you have any medical training, you're called a doc. So if you're corpsman who has 8 weeks training, you're like me and you have 8 years of training, like it's doc. Everybody's doc. And so they called it Doc Parsley sleep cocktail because it's just like a cocktail of a bunch of different supplements. And when I made it into a product, that's originally what I named it, which was a terrible marketing. In case you couldn't guess that, like I never even thought about it. I was really just making it
right?
I was making it for the SEALs, and so I called it what they called it.
Yeah.
And everybody thought it was to mix with alcohol.
Yeah.
And it got blocked by firewalls and all this stuff, so we had to change the name. But anyway, once I got them off of the sleep drugs, and I was giving them some of the guys, I was giving things to help support their hormones during the day, things like DHEA and pregnenolone and like zinc to block estrogen conversion and things like that. And their total testosterone and free testosterone were tripling, quadrupling in like 6 months. Their growth hormone, or IGF-1, their marker for that was doubling, tripling. All their inflammatory markers were going down. Their oxidative markers were going down. Their chronic pain went away. They started getting leaner. And I thought, wow, man, it wasn't 100% for 100%, but it was like 80% solution for 80% of the guys, but everybody got better.
Yeah.
And then later, I kind of figured out how important the TBI component was. And once we started working with that, we got like another 10, 15%. And then that last 5%, that's all nuanced, super individual things, person to person that we figured out. And we used to do a bunch of seminars for the SEALs because they're into health and wellness. And so we'd bring in health and wellness speakers, guys like Rob Wolf and Pearl Mutter, and Dave Grossman came in and talked about the psychology of killing, whatever. And so like we had educational symposiums for SEALs. And they would always bring me in because I was free. I was in the Navy, so they didn't have to pay me to be there. So I was at all of them. But then I got to meet all these people who were like the health and wellness influencers. We didn't call it that day, right? But in those days, but the health and wellness influencers of the time were all coming through, and I was sharing a stage with them, and they were fascinated by what I was doing, and because no one was talking about it yet, and so they started inviting me on the podcast and inviting me to symposiums to lecture, and I started doing all that, and then I just became a sleep guy, right? Like I'm really a performance guy. Like I do everything that's associated with performance, but sleep, that was the sleep guy. And so I was like the loudest voice in sleep for probably 5 years or something like that. And that led to, like, when I got out, just private consulting, people wanting the same type of work that I do with deals, because everybody wants to perform better, right? And and what excites me and what motivates me, I have a hard time saying as a physician because it's not really a physician's role, but I'm more of like a health coach with a medical license that I can prescribe and so forth. But but what really motivates me is taking motivated, ambitious people who are pretty well off, and they want to get better, or they're excellent and they want to be the best, or or they're the best and they want to make sure that they stay the best, or like that. So that's super motivating to me because the clients are really motivated their goals are really, to get better and improve, and they'll give you tons of feedback and you get to learn a lot. Whereas when you do medicine, like treating people who are broken, diseased, and they're begrudgingly doing what you're telling them to do, hoping that their life doesn't suck quite as bad until they die. Like that, it's not, I mean, I know that's a grim way of putting it and hyperbolic, but that's kind of how I ended up doing what I am doing and why I'm the sleep guy now.
Yeah. So for listeners that don't really understand what happens during sleep, can we back it up just a little bit and talk about, again, the difference between REM and deep sleep, and when this happens during the night, the different stages? That would be great.
Yeah. So, the interesting thing about sleep medicine, it's not very old. It's about 70 years old total. And like real sleep medicine, like anything of consequence that's come out with sleep is probably come out in the last 30 years. So there's not a lot of controversy in sleep literature, unlike nutritional literature or exercise literature or like all the other stuff where everybody's bickering at each other. Like sleep medicine's pretty straightforward. It's like you're born into a body, right? You have a body that was designed to be on this planet. And that design requires 8 hours to recover from being awake for 16 hours. And that's just the way it is. And it's supposed to happen when the sun goes down, because that's how you evolved and that's how you perform the best. So the closer you can live to that, the healthier you are. And so anytime there's any type of controversy in the literature, I say, well, what's the closest to evolution, right? Like how did we evolve? That's probably the right answer, right?
It is,
which is why I think veganism and keto are probably not right. It's like we didn't evolve to do either one of those. We evolved something in between there. So anyway, with sleep, the literature, it's legion already. The amount of literature that said, that talks about sleeping during your circadian alignment being the most important time. The most important way to sleep, and the regularity of sleep being very important. And that makes sense evolutionarily. We're animals that can't see very well at night. We're not great, before we had really good weapons, like we weren't great predators at all, right? Like we were kind of probably the easiest prey on the planet. We don't have claws, we don't have fangs, we're not super strong, we're not super fast. And so when the sun went down, we would retreat into whatever little protective structure or environment we had, a cave or under a rock, a structure that we could build, something like that, because the sun went down, right? And so once the sun goes down, that's our cue to start getting ready for sleep. And people have heard of blue light, and almost certainly the reason blue light is the trigger is because the sky's blue. And so when the blue light diminishes, there's nerves in the back of our eyes that sense that. They don't have anything to do with vision. They just sense light. They just sense blue light. And when blue light goes down, that activates this really circuitous pathway, which eventually leads to the pineal gland secreting melatonin. And melatonin does not make you go to sleep. Melatonin is the initiation of a bunch of cascades that then make you fall asleep. And if you look at hunter-gatherers, or if you go camping without electricity, it takes 2 to 3 hours after the sun goes down for you to feel really sleepy, because that's the natural evolution of all these changes that go on in your brain. So just think evolutionarily, blue light goes down, melatonin starts getting secreted. The best definition of sleep is that we're not paying attention. We're not attentive to our environment. We're not attentive to any of our senses. They're still there. They're still working, but we just kind of shut all that down. So we slow down our neocortex, right?
Yeah.
And then because the sun went down and we didn't have heaters, our body temperatures went down. So those are the 3 cues evolutionary that made us feel like sleeping. And so once we start falling asleep, we go into what's called sleep cycles, right? And like I said, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, those are all stress hormones. Those are secreted to make us alert and awake. When we're really scared and we need to be really alert, there's a lot of those. When we're just barely waking up, there's just a moderate amount of those. But one of the effects of all these changes after melatonin gets secreted and all of these changes in our brain starts, one of the consequences of that is all of our stress hormones go down.
Yes.
And we go from stage one, which is kind of like halfway asleep. Like, you're just processing the world slightly different. You can still see things and hear things, and maybe you're integrating that into like a dreamlike state, but you're not quite normal. And we go into stage two, which is proper sleep. You've now turned off your awareness to your environment. And then you go into stages 3 and 4, which are deep sleep. And
Mhm.
these are just really essentially brain waves. So the overall pattern, different regions of your brain are activated different, but like the overall brainwave patterns are really slow. And what we call stages 3 and 4, or theta and delta sleep. And when that happens, one of the first things that happens is a bunch of the cells that hold the structure of our brain shrink down by about 30%. And people have probably heard of this by now. It's the glymphatic system,
Mhm.
where it starts flowing more cerebral spinal fluid to flush out all the waste products that's in our brain. Being awake is catabolic. Like, being awake and alert is catabolic. You're using up resources. Every cell in your body, 30 trillion of them, are a smaller version of you.
Mhm.
They're awake part of the day. They're asleep part of the day. They do different things when they're asleep than they do when they're awake. And they all need nutrition. They all take in oxygen. They all take in nutrients. They do work, and then they produce waste products. Well, the waste products sit around in our lymphatics and glymphatics until we flush them out. So that's one of the major things is we flush out waste products from our brain. Being awake longer than you should be awake actually starts turning those waste products into inflammation, and that inflammation can lead to the lay down of beta amyloid plaques, which is associated with neurological decline. So you're kind of damaging your brain by staying up. So the glymphatics flush everything out. And then your brain starts measuring. A region of your brain called the hypothalamus starts measuring all your hormones. And then it says, okay, do we have enough of this or don't we? So if we don't have enough, so take something simple like testosterone
Mhm.
or estrogen. The brain actually has very few testosterone receptors. It has estrogen receptors. And that's kind of how your brain figures out how much testosterone you have too, which is different in men and women, obviously. But um, your brain starts sensing how much estrogen you have. And if it says, oh, we need more testosterone or we need more estrogen, then the pituitary will secrete luteinizing hormone. And luteinizing hormone will then go to the ovaries or the testicles and produce more testosterone or estrogen. And
Mhm.
that's true for every hormone in your body. So it's rebalancing all of your hormones, anabolic hormones. It's also rebalancing the hormones that are associated with satiation and appetite. So ghrelin and leptin, those are being rebalanced in there. Thyroid's being rebalanced in there. All of your hormones, like essentially 100% of your hormonal milieu, is being evaluated and adjusted during deep sleep. Now, once you hit that deep sleep, that lasts for somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes. And then you'll start going from stage 4 to 3 back through 2. And then instead of going to stage 1, you shoot right past that and you go into REM. And then you do a little bit of REM. And then when that REM period's over, that's one sleep cycle. And that whole sleep cycle is 90 to 120 minutes. And like I said, when you go into REM, that's when you start rehearsing things. That's when your brain starts doing its anabolic activities primarily, and it has to replenish all of its nutrients, right? We've gotten rid of the waste products. Now we need to rebalance neurotransmitters. We need to balance the electrolytes and micronutrients that are inside of every cell and that are in the cerebral spinal fluid. All of that has to be readjusted while we're figuring out the information we need to hold on to, what we need to let go of, how we're going to emotionally categorize all these things. So in short, the whole reason to sleep is to repair
I mean,
from
if
from
we learn
today, right?
anything, yes, it's so
It's
important.
so yeah, so I'm going to sleep tonight because right now I'm damaging myself, right? Like right now I'm
Mhm.
depleting resources.
Right.
And I will until I go to bed tonight. So the whole reason I'm going to sleep tonight is because I have to repair from all of everything I did today. And if I worked out really hard and I did more work than my muscles were capable of doing, then my body's going to try to repair me so that my muscles are stronger tomorrow. So it's
Mhm.
going to use today as a template to figure out what I need to prepare for tomorrow. So I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to repair and prepare. If I could repair and prepare 100%, I would wake up exactly the same every day and I would never age, right? Because I repaired 100% and I prepared 100%. And I actually got a little better because I prepared to be able to lift more weight tomorrow. And now tomorrow I'll be slightly stronger and I actually get better, which is what happens when you're young, right? When you're a kid, you go to sleep and you wake up smarter and taller and stronger and faster, right? And then that plateaus somewhere like from 25 to 35. That's kind of like a net zero. And then after that, it kind of starts going the other way. And you start repairing 99.9998% or something every night. And that's aging. And you're essentially losing resources, right? Because you've lost your ability to repair. So you're not repairing 100% of your damage. And you've lost some of your ability to prepare. So you're not quite as capable. You don't have quite as many resources tomorrow. So if you choose to sleep 6 hours instead of 8 hours because you want to get ahead, you've chosen to age 25% faster. And that's why we know people with chronic insomnia. We know people who work shift work. We know people who use sleep aids chronically die about 14 years younger than the average person.
What are your thoughts on people who need to nap every day? Do you think that, and I know there's some people who do that because they know they're not sleeping, and then there's some people who say that they do sleep, but
Right.
and they still have to nap every day.
Yeah, so it's really all about rate of change, right? So obviously, if you didn't get enough sleep, the very best thing for you to do is to get as much sleep as you possibly can as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So if you have to wake up after 6 hours and do a Zoom call, the very best thing for you to do is to go right back to sleep after that Zoom call. Now, nobody's going to do that, but that would be the best thing. I tell the same thing to shift workers. It's like, you stayed up all night, you're supposed to be asleep. The very best thing for you to do is to go to sleep as soon as you get home and sleep as much as you possibly can. But that's when they get to spend time with their family. It's the only time they see their kids before they go to, right? So, there's ideal, there's reality. We try to mitigate in between. But if you're sleep deprived, naps they're not going to prevent the damage that you're causing, right? There are some deleterious effects. Those are unavoidable. But the faster you can compensate for those, you can mitigate the damage by giving yourself sleep. So naps are a no-brainer in that situation. Now, the other thing is rate of change. So I have a certain amount of energy, so to speak, like just think of micronutrients and nutrients and electrolytes and ATP and oxygen supply, blood supply, all that to my brain. I have a finite amount of that, right? I can't make that go faster, but if I overwork myself for 3 to 4 hours and I've kind of depleted everything, my brain might say, "Hey, we should nap for a bit. Like we should crash for a little bit, and then we'll get better. We'll wake up, we'll be better, and we'll go on about our day." But on top of that, naps can actually be used as a performance enhancing tool. So even if you're sleeping well, and even if you don't necessarily deplete yourself and feel bad, like your resources are diminishing throughout the day. So if you can restore those resources in certain parts of your day, you'll do better. So as an example, if you take about a 15 to 20 minute nap, it will restore your creativity substantially, 20-30%. So if you're somebody who has a job that requires creative thought or other types of creation, and you take a couple of naps in a day, you're going to have a little boost of 20 to 30% better every time you wake up. A lot of really famous inventors did this, right? So Thomas Edison did this. Benjamin Franklin did this. They figured out ways to take naps and wake themselves up. I think Benjamin Franklin slept with like two metal ball bearings in his hands, and so like he would lean back in his chair whenever he fell asleep enough to drop those, it would wake him up and he would come up. And if you've ever had the experience of like taking a language or a complex math course and you working so hard to figure something out and you just give up and you go to bed and you wake up, you're like,
Yeah,
I got it. Obviously. Okay. Well, that's just that process in action, right? Now, if you extend that a little bit further, you get back some of your neurocognitive, your what we call executive functioning, right? That prefrontal cortex, that part that makes us the smartest animal on the planet. So that's our ability to plan, it's a simulator basically, right? So we can say, well, what would happen if I did this? I have 5 different options. Let me imagine what would happen. As far as we know, we're the only animal on the planet that can do that can say, yeah, there's 6 different ways I could do this. Let me think through all of them and figure out which one I think is the best path, pros and cons. Also, just solving complex problems, math problems, anything like that. That's executive functioning. So about 20 to 45 minutes will restore that again by about 20-30%. And then if you sleep, one sleep cycle, say somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes, you get the benefit really of all the benefits of being asleep. So your body actually repairs, your hormones actually rebalance again, and you repair damage and any type of injuries, get rid of some inflammation, all of that. And when I say performance enhancing tool, like literally I've used it like that with UFC fighters, right? So they'll be, say, like they're a great grappler and they're going against somebody who's a striker. They're like, they wrestle and this guy boxes. And so they got to get really good at boxing, and that's not their game. So they have 8 weeks to get as good as they possibly can. And so what they'll do is they'll train, they'll take a nap, they'll train, they'll take a nap, they'll train, they'll go home and go to sleep. And so what research has shown is if y'all are sleeping well and you're well sleep adapted, and I say, come into my office in the morning, I'm gonna teach you something. And it could be like anything. Like it could be something physical, like I could teach you to type with your left hand only, or whatever. Like we could do anything, juggle, skills, lift weights, it doesn't matter. So we do something, we train you on it. And then I say, come back at 7:00 tonight, and I want you to test on that and see how much you've retained.
Mm-hmm.
And when you come back at 7:00 at night, you'll be worse than you left the training because some of that's faded, right? Like you've lost some of that. However, with no more training, you go home that night, you go to sleep, and you come back the next morning, and I test you before we train.
Yeah.
You will test better than you left training the day before. So you somehow got better without doing any more of that. What's interesting, the research also shows, is that if I say, we do the same thing, test in the morning, and then I say, I want you to take a nap around noon and then come back at 7:00 tonight. When you come back at 7:00 tonight, you perform just as though you've gone home and gone to sleep. You perform better than you left your training. And then when you go home and go to sleep that night, you come back and you perform better again. So now you've gotten 2 days of training in one day. And so that's why I say it can be a performance enhancing tool. And that could also be anything cognitive. It doesn't have to be physical. That if I was having you memorize a list or teaching you some sort of complex science or engineering or something like that, it would be the same thing.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about napping too. So many things come to mind when we're getting into all this, but let's say, for example, and you talk about this in your sleep guide and the ritual, and we'll get into that. But let's say someone has 6 hours of sleep. They get up, they have a hard time falling back to sleep. What should they do? I loved when you touched base on this, because this is a lot of patients that we've worked with and things like that. So what should they do if they're, getting up a little bit too early? Their heart starts racing. They're like, I should be going to sleep. Like, what do I need to be doing? Yeah.
Well, here's where I said sleep literature isn't controversial, but I'm going to be a little controversial here.
Okay.
So what the sleep scientists will tell you is, get up and have a warm cup of milk or read a book or like something like that. I say, no, that's completely bogus information. So like I said, we evolved to be asleep for 8 hours a night. You're born into that contract. You can't do anything about it. Just like you're going to die and you need 8 hours of sleep. Like that's it. Like there's no, you can put all the butter in your coffee you want, wear whatever kind of glasses you want. Like it doesn't matter. You need 8 hours of sleep. So what I say is that 8 hours, in bed, that's sacred. Like that is the most important thing in your life, because that's when you get better. And that's when you repair yourself and prepare yourself. That's when you're maintaining yourself. That's when you're working on you more than any meditation or exercise or anything else you're doing to work on you. That's when you're working on you. That's when you're getting better. Nobody gets better. Nobody gets stronger when they work out. They get stronger when they repair. Nobody gets smarter when they study. They get smarter once they've solidified it at night, right? And so I say, much like our ancestors, you need to spend some time getting ready to go to bed. It's unrealistic to think that you're going to be 100% alert and working and active and normal until 9:45 and get in bed at 10 and expect to be asleep at 10. That doesn't work. So you need some length of time to get ready. I say a minimum of an hour. 2 hours would probably be ideal. Very few people can do that. Life gets in the way, right? We have other obligations. But you set an alarm to say, now it's time to get ready for bed. And there's no way around this. Like, you need to get ready for bed. And that alarm is just as important as the alarm that wakes you up for all your responsibilities the next day. You can't avoid either one of those. So you set your alarm, it's time to get ready for bed. At that point, you start decreasing the light in your eyes. You start decreasing your interaction with the environment, because we want our brain to stop interacting with the environment. And you do something to lower your body temperature. And that could be a shower, that could be a bath, that could be turning your air conditioning down, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But lower your body temperature a little bit, lower your engagement with the world, and decrease the light in your eyes. And I'm not saying you have to have all candlelight or whatever. You can wear blue blocking glasses. You can put a program on your television or on your phone or your computer or whatever that takes the blue light out, but decrease the blue light. And now you're going to bed at, say, 10 o'clock. So let's say 9 o'clock, the alarm goes off. I'm not doing anything except getting ready for bed. Like, yeah, that's it. Like, I'm getting ready for bed until 10 o'clock. And then at 10 o'clock, I'm getting in bed. And I'm going to have an alarm clock that's going to wake me up in the morning. Even if I know 100% that I don't need that alarm clock, I'm going to have that big thing I could possibly worry about, even subconsciously. So I'm getting ready. I get ready to go to bed. I get into bed, and now I put my phone away. If I have an alarm clock, I put that in a drawer. I put a towel over it. I don't want to know what time it is. It doesn't matter what time it is, because I'm not doing anything except recovering. I'm repairing and preparing until the morning alarm clock goes off. Now, the other part of this is I have a list of all the things in the world that are important to me, all the things I need to do, all the things that I want to worry about that I don't have any control of, but I know I'm not worried about them. So I'm going to put on my list so I won't forget to worry. And I make that list earlier in the day. You'll find that list doesn't change much from day to day most of the time. And you put that by your bed, and you can have a pencil or pen right there. So if anything pops in your mind that's not on your list, you turn on the light and you put that back in. So now I go to bed and I say, I'm going to lay here and I'm going to do the closest thing to sleep, which is meditate or prayer or breath work or progressive muscle relaxation or whatever it is that I respond to, that I value, that resonates with me, but something that really, really, really relaxes me. And I'm going to do that until the alarm clock goes off. And at some point, I'm going to fall asleep. And if I wake up from sleep, I'm just going to keep doing that, because it makes no sense to do anything other than to repair and prepare, right? So if I wake up at 3 a.m, first of all, I don't have any idea it's 3 a.m, because I don't have a clock. I'm not looking at my clock.
Don't look at it.
Yeah.
And if I need to go to the bathroom, I get up and I go to the bathroom and I come back to bed. I don't need to know what time it is. I'm going to lay down and start meditating. And once I start meditating, my alarm clock goes off 15 minutes later. I go, well, I guess I got 7 hours and 45 minutes of sleep, and I meditated for 15 minutes. And now I'm getting up and getting after my list and doing what I do. And if my alarm clock's not going to go off for 4 or 5 hours, at some point I'm going to fall back asleep.
Right.
Yeah.
And then my alarm clock's going to go off and I'm going to be like, I don't know how long I slept. But all I did was sleep and meditate, right? All I did was repair and prepare. And if I wasn't sleeping, I was doing the next best thing to sleeping. Now, all that is conceptually very simple. The hardest part is knowing that you want to be at your best when you're going to handle everything that's important is intellectually simple, right? Getting yourself to believe that and behave that way, that's cognitive behavioral therapy, right? That's something you'll convince yourself over time. And at some point that will click and you'll be like, I'm wasting my time. Like, I'm worrying about something that's on my list and I'm diminishing my ability to handle that thing in the morning because I'm worrying about it right now.
Yeah.
I can't do anything about it right now. So right now I'm going to repair and prepare. And then you just refocus on that. Like once that clicks in your brain and that's just an obvious thought and you don't have to convince yourself in it, that's when the magic starts. Like that's when you go, it's like this tiniest little, and you're, oh my God, now I get it. You will never struggle with insomnia for the rest of your life once you get there.
Yeah.
And of all the things I do, like any type of innovative new age gadgets, medicine, new ways of
Yeah.
thinking. I do all of that. I keep up on all of that. I research all of that. I have friends that are the best at all of that stuff. I use all of that. The most powerful thing I do as a consultant is get people to do this list.
Isn't that crazy? Like the simple things
Yep.
are what matters most. That's what we have found working with patients is you have
Yep.
to go back to the basics.
Yeah.
So again, listeners, if you hear that, if you get up, just stay in bed, your phone's away, don't look at your phone.
Right.
Make sure your alarm set at that 8 hours, your to-do
Right.
list, your to-worry list, it's there. You can take care of it when you're done, getting up, but just stay the task and it will
Right.
get better.
Yeah,
And I think
true.
my team, if they didn't already offer you that, like anytime we go on a podcast, we offer that to
Oh yeah,
the
we'll put it in the show
podcasters
notes.
to give to your audience. So like we create a link for them to go to and download that for free.
For
So
sure.
they don't have to search for it. And I think it's behind a paywall sometimes it's not, you know, there's games go,
Yeah.
but that will definitely be and it's just kind of an outline of what I just said. Right. But it's a way for people to see it and practice it. And it's really just practice. And like I said, once it clicks in, it's revolutionary. And the other really cool thing is like if I get you to change your behavior around eating or
Mhm.
exercising over the course of 6 months to a year, it'll revolutionize your life, right? And
I
you'll just be like,
know.
oh my God, all sleep takes is like 7 days. Like
Yeah.
Yes.
like once you really practice that for 7 days, once that clicks and you're like, oh my God, I had no idea that all the I like I like people literally come to me and they say it's like somebody turned the lights on. Like
Yeah.
I can't believe what a zombie I was.
Oh,
That's one of the things we know through sleep research is that your ability to assess yourself diminishes with sleep deprivation, and you
mhm.
convince yourself. So we all know people who say I sleep 5 hours a night and that's all I need.
That's all I need.
It's all I
Oh,
need. I feel
so many
great.
people say
It's like
that.
Right.
no, it's like no,
Sleep when
you
you're dead. Like I'm like, oh,
right, right. They're like, I feel great with five. I feel great with 5 hours. I'm like,
huh,
no, you don't. You feel terrible with 5 hours, but you think that's great because that's all you've ever done. And so you
right.
think that's normal. It's like if I made you carry around a 40-pound weight vest all the time, you'd just be like, well, that feels normal. But when I took the 40-pound
Right.
weight vest off, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is so
Wow.
much easier. Why? I'm like, why wasn't it? Why have I been carrying this 40? And that's what happens.
Yeah.
And people just, and we don't believe it. In fact, that example I gave you with the learning, you have somebody come in and you teach them a skill.
Hmm.
There's other research. It's like you take people who sleep really well. We call it sleep adapted. So they've been sleeping very regularly and adequately for at least a month. And then you bring them in, you teach them a skill. Um, and then you have them come back the next day, but the next day, but that night you take 2 hours of sleep away from them. So they sleep 6 hours instead of 8 hours. And when they come back the next day and you test them, and this works also with not a new skill, this works with something that is your thing. This could be like
Yeah.
this is what I'm great at. And I take 2 hours of sleep away, and then the next morning I come back and I test you, and you'll do worse than you did the morning before. Like 100% guaranteed. Nobody does better, and no one does as good. It varies how much worse you get. That varies individually quite a bit, but you'll do worse. And then if I ask you, how do you think you did? You'll say, I did worse. I was tired. I didn't feel like great. And then the next night, that night you only get to sleep 6 hours again and you come back. And the same thing will happen. And you'll say, I felt worse. And by the third day, the same thing will happen. And I'll ask you, and you might say you felt worse. But by the fourth day, 100% of people will say, I've completely adapted to the 6 hours sleep and I did as well as I've ever done. And I might have done better, in fact. And then you can show them the data and go, nope, you're still getting worse. Like, like it hasn't changed. So, so people who've been sleeping 5 or 6 hours a night for their whole life, like they've just, they've just been on this detriment. Like they've been handicapping themselves their
Yeah.
whole lives. So they just think that's the normal them. And like I
Mhm.
said, people get 7 nights of good sleep, like we described, and all of a sudden their capabilities are completely different. And more importantly, like your your sense of well-being, like the joy you get out of it, how you relate to other people, like the your interest in other people, how you perceive other people, if you perceive people as threatening or warm and inviting, all of that changes with sleep deprivation. And so
Yeah.
there's other studies where they did something very similar with couples, and they had couples, spend the whole day together doing something fun, like whatever. You guys go out and have a date. We're going to pay for everything. Like, y'all just have fun, and then come back tonight and tell us, like, we're going to put you in separate rooms and ask you questions about your spouse. And if when you took 2 hours away from them, independently, both spouses said the other one wasn't quite there. Like, wasn't he
Yes.
wasn't quite as connected. He wasn't paying much attention. Like he
Yeah.
wasn't quite as affectionate. I didn't really feel his energy. Like, it's subtle stuff. It's communication. He was a little snappy with his comment. Like he seemed a little grumpy, whatever. Like, and they both say that about each other. It doesn't matter which one you sleep deprived.
Right.
And tell me that's not going on, to a catastrophic level in all Western cultures. I mean, everybody's doing that all of the time.
So true. Okay, I have a question for you that a lot of people probably listening won't like.
Okay.
So I wear the Aura ring,
Uh,
and I'm measuring things, right? If I have one drink of alcohol,
yeah.
everything is completely messed up. And not only for the next day, for me, because I'm very sensitive, I mean, it could be a week that I'll be off.
Mm.
So, what are your thoughts on alcohol and its effect on sleep?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no doubt that alcohol has a deleterious effect on sleep. Like, you just can't get away from that. And like you said, alcohol primarily affects deep sleep. So that's the
Mhm.
anabolic, that's the repair. So you maintain about 80% of REM. So like your cognitive functioning shouldn't be as bad the next day, other than you just won't be as energetic. But it affects your hormones. And when your hormones are lower, everything's worse, right? And something I meant to point out earlier, you know, I spoke about testosterone and kind of estrogen simultaneously. Testosterone is the primary sex hormone for both men and women, right?
Mhm.
People think, well, women is estrogen. It's like, well, no, women have 10 times more estrogen than men, but women also have 10 times more testosterone than they do estrogen. So
Mhm.
testosterone is still the primary sex hormone in both, and it's the primary anabolic hormone in both. So I just wanted to point that out. But alcohol will interfere with all of that hormonal regulation more than the cognitive stuff. And the only way around that is to have less alcohol in your system when you go to sleep,
Yeah.
and or be better hydrated when you go to sleep. So ideally you drink as far away from bedtime as possible,
Mhm.
So
which
day drinking.
which logically would mean you wake up and drink. I'm not suggesting that, but
Right.
if you want to have a glass of wine, it's much better to have it at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
than it is to have it at 8 or 9 p.m. And then for every alcoholic drink you have, I say drink at least 12 ounces of water. Ideally, 12 ounces of water with some electrolytes in it. If you
Yeah.
stay really well hydrated, alcohol has less of an effect. What's happening is alcohol is essentially a toxin, right? So when it's in your bloodstream, it's being perceived as a toxin, and your immune system is ramping up to deal with it. So just like you have a hard time sleeping when you're sick because your immune system is ramped up to fight off the virus or bacterial infection you have, or you have a hard time sleeping when you're in pain or when you have an injury because everything's ramped up, your stress hormones are ramped up, your immune system's ramped up. So that's what's going on, and there's really no way to get around that. Now, with that said, I mean, the entire world obeys the Pareto distribution, right? It's like
Mhm.
the 80-20 rule. I mean, that's just like, right. It's like 20% of your employees do 80% of the work, right?
Mhm.
20% of the trees produce 80% of the fruit. Like, like it's just, that's just the way the world works. And so I always encourage my clients to live by the Pareto distribution, because I think anytime you get uh, too obsessed with perfection, it starts backfiring because
Yeah.
everybody then starts getting so stressed about what they're doing and they become obsessive, and now they're losing, like they're forgetting the whole purpose they did. All the whole purpose of this was to feel better and have better relationships and more energy and more joy and enjoy your life better and be able to work towards the future that you desire. And if you're just like so driven on that, that you're a Spartan and it's like everything you do is 100% on track, then that leads to like elevation of stress hormones. And now you have a hard time sleeping because your stress hormones are too high. And then you'll lay in bed and you'll worry that you aren't sleeping as well. And then you'll wake up and just running around with high stress hormones, like I said, is catabolic. So
Mhm.
it prevents you from being able to build muscle, it prevents you from being able to repair, it prevents you from thinking well. The only if you've ever been in fight or flight, so like, a car wreck or a near car wreck or a physical attack or something like that, you can't think. Like your prefrontal cortex
Mhm.
doesn't work at all. And
No.
so when you have just slightly elevated, like if your stress hormones are raised by 20%, your your prefrontal cortex works 20% less, right?
Yeah.
It's not quite as good. And when you don't sleep well, like when I said you can choose to sleep 6 hours, right, instead of 8 hours, you wake up the next day, you're not as repaired and you're not as prepared. So how do you compensate?
Hmm.
Like tomorrow still comes, you still have to do everything. So what do?
Right.
You release stress hormones because stress
Yeah.
hormones rev everything up. And you go, okay, well, I can produce more energy if I release stress hormones and I can get over the fact that I didn't sleep well. And episodically, that works fine. And that's how we're designed, right? But when you do that chronically, well, your stress hormones get higher because you didn't sleep enough. And now you have a hard time sleeping because your stress hormones are too high.
Mhm.
Right.
And you
It's
get in
just
this
a
vicious cycle, like you're never
domino.
getting out of that, and then
Yeah.
that's when you have to like take a mental health month and like you practice that thing and just like I got to shut everything down because that's a really hard cycle to get out of.
It is. And then even think about our kids, right? Like,
Oh,
sleep is so important for kids because their brains are still developing. What? The prefrontal cortex isn't
yeah,
developed 25, right?
yeah. It's as late. It can be as late as 25 in either sex. It's more likely to be 25 in men. Like females
Yeah.
develop about 2 to 3 years earlier, but it can go up to 25 in women too. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
it's I mean, it's disheartening and sad and tragic what we do to our kids.
Yeah.
All of the like again, sleep research non-controversial. 100% of sleep research says we're doing the wrong thing for our children.
Yeah.
100% of it, and
Yeah.
it's a socio-political
Oh, yeah.
play that we don't do anything about it. There's
Hmm.
we've done it in private schools.
Hmm.
Uh, there's an organization. Called Start School Later. And it's been around for a long time. It's a big lobbying group. And they put together research with private schools who had control over when they started their schools. And they only started school like 45 minutes later, 45 minutes or an hour later. And when they did that, like the GPA of every student increased. Like it was the highest GPA average they'd ever had.
Yeah.
Truancy went down,
Wow.
behavioral problems went down, sports injuries went down, and every single sports team on every school that did this had the best season they had ever had.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. And like you said, the prefrontal cortex is how we interpret the world.
Yeah.
And once that's fully formed, that's how we're going to interpret the world for the rest of our lives, right?
Yeah.
And the older you get, the more solidified that is, right? The more crystallized we call that is. Your neuroplasticity fades the older you get. And I'm not a grumpy old man because I'm 54. I'm a grumpy old man because my brain is crystallized and I think this is the way you do it, and everybody doing it the other way is wrong, right? And that's being solidified in our kids' brain when their brain needs the most recovery, we're depriving them the most. High school kids are more sleep deprived than their parents because there's a phase shift in adolescence, right? So when you're in adolescence and your hormones start cranking up, and we don't know why this is, but there's about a 2 hour phase shift to the right, making it later. So now instead of feeling sleepy at 10 o'clock, you're going to feel sleepy at midnight.
Yeah.
And they're starting to have fun and exciting conversations with other people, and they're not going to turn off their interaction with the world. So it's a lot easier for them to stay up, right? And so we're taking phase shifted kids that now probably need to go to bed at midnight, and kids need about 30% more sleep than we do. So they need somewhere around like 10 to 12 hours of sleep. Let's just call it 10. And now they're going to sleep at midnight, but they got to be up at 6 a.m. to catch the bus at 6:45 or whatever. And so our kids are far more sleep deprived than we are, and their brains are forming.
Right. And making all these decisions, like life decisions, right?
Right.
Like what college to go to,
Right.
all of these things, like even marrying a spouse.
Whether or not to have unprotected sex.
Yes.
Right? I mean, like decisions like this is what you want to really, you want your brain to be functioning at this peak. When you're doing stuff like that, right? And we're doing exactly the opposite. We are destroying generations. And this is all relatively new. I mean, this is all post-industrial revolution, right? Because before that, before rural electrification and before you could work 24 hours a day in a factory, and do night shifts or whatever. Before all that, everybody went to sleep when the sun went down, right? Like there wasn't anything else to do. Like you lay in bed and read by candlelight or lamplight for a little bit, and then you go to sleep. And you couldn't see much when you woke up in the morning if the sun wasn't up. So that's kind of just what everybody did for millennia.
Yeah.
And in the last, 120 years now, we've just throwing all that out the window. And the more technology we have, the more lights we have, the more power we have, the more LEDs we can have to reduce the energy and increase brightness. Like it's just getting worse and worse. And now, of course, our iPhones and, and computers and internet and all that gaming, everything that's accessible to kids. I mean, it's not even close to how we evolved. And so there's no way that our kids are enjoying the full potential of their body and the full potential experience of being a human, because we've taken away 50% of it, 40%, it's just gone. Like we've wiped it out by living in an environment that we didn't evolve to live in.
Right.
It's true.
And another really interesting thing is that humans are the only animal on the planet that deprive themselves of sleep on purpose.
I know.
The only other time any other animal will deprive themselves of sleep is if they're being preyed, if they're being stalked. So they'll only sleep as much as they have to, so they don't get eaten, or if they're starving. And if they're starving, they want to get up earlier, be able to forage further before they have to go to sleep again. And so it makes perfect sense that our brains would perceive lack of sleep as the same thing. So if we're deliberately losing sleep, our lizard brain is still going, oh, we must be in danger, right? And so we start metabolizing food a different way. It's called fuel partitioning, like what we do with the calories we eat. Do we store it as fat? Well, if we think we're starving, we better store it as fat. Like we'll use the glucose now, everything else we're going to store as fat, right? And so our body is going to start behaving as though we're under threat, and our prefrontal cortex is going to start acting like we're under threat. When you're, like I said, when you're in fight or flight, you don't want your prefrontal cortex involved because you want to react. You want everything to be reflexive. You want to focus on the threat and then react immediately. If you think through things, you're going to lose, you're going to die. And so when you're starving, animals are like, well, there's some kind of building there with a bunch of people and maybe I'll get killed, but that trash can looks like the only food. I'm going to go try it, right? Or they'll try to eat something they've never seen before, and it might kill them, but they're just like, prefrontal cortex is gone. Like the decision-making skills, like, nope, I'm just, it's interesting. If you sleep deprive people, like kind of every metric of human, every metric of human flaws or debauchery or whatever you want to call it, they all get worse, right?
Yeah.
If you mildly sleep deprive somebody, you reduce their ability to maintain a diet and exercise protocol, they're more likely to get fired from their job. They're more likely to have an affair on their spouse. They're more likely to obviously get in a car crash. They're more likely to have arguments and fist fights and everything we don't like about ourselves that requires willpower, self-control, and self-assessment. All of that stuff gets worse, and significantly worse. I mean, it's like 30% worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. Sleep is everything.
It is.
It's a terrible sales pitch, because you're right. You're never supposed to say your snake oil fixes everything, but it
No,
does. It's like
important.
it's the only time you're getting better. Like that's the part of human, that's the part of human existence where you're getting better.
Yeah.
Sleep. You
It's so
diminish that,
true.
you diminish everything. Like
Yeah.
the whole reason we get out of bed every day is like there's something out there in the future that we have projected that we want to work towards, right?
Yeah.
The safety of our children, financial gains, better health, like whatever it is, like we have a future we're working towards. There's things we want. And the whole reason we get out of bed is to do those. And we're deliberately handicapping our ability to do that, hindering our ability to do that because we want to be a hard worker, to be dedicated. We want to be we want to get up and beat the competition.
Sleep when you're dead. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Reframe.
Sleep is for the weak. I mean, I probably chose the two worst professions in the world, right? Like I went through SEAL training. We go a whole week without sleep in SEAL training. And then when you get in the SEAL teams, if there's work to be done and you're sleeping, you're obviously weak and you're not a team player. So you shouldn't be sleeping at any point.
Right.
And then you become a doctor and it's like, every other night you're on call for 36 hours in a row.
Yeah.
And then I was really smart because I figured, that residency and internship, I figured that was a really good time to start doing triathlons. And so I was riding my bike to and from work. It was like 25 miles and just through all this traffic. And I haven't slept for 40 hours and I'm riding my bike through rush hour traffic in San Diego. And I'm just going, super smart. Like I'm, I'm dumb, but I'm slow.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really great. Can you just let us know a little bit about your sleep remedy and then where people can find you?
Yeah. So the sleep remedy, like I said, I developed just to help the SEALs get off of Ambien. All I did is I said, what are the natural things involved in sleep? Like what are the natural nutrients? What do we use? How does it happen? So we talked about melatonin, melatonin being the initiator of the cascade. And it doesn't just happen once, right? Like melatonin is being secreted throughout the night at different ratios. And every region of your brain is changing a lot so your brain's really, really active overnight. But if you've ever experienced the Thanksgiving tryptophan coma everybody talks about, right?
Yeah.
Tryptophan is just an amino acid that's in turkey. It's in meat, period. There's no more tryptophan in turkey than any other kind of meat, but it's the meat we overeat the most, I guess. I don't know. And then the huge stacks of carbs don't help either. Like there's something going on there. But basically the way our brain makes melatonin is through tryptophan. So tryptophan becomes 5-hydroxytryptophan. And then with the help of vitamin D3 and magnesium, 5-hydroxytryptophan becomes serotonin, and then serotonin becomes melatonin. And then, like I said, melatonin initiates the cascades. One of the first parts of the cascade is the release of a neurotransmitter or neuropeptide called GABA, capital GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. And that slows down the brain. Like I said, we want to quit interacting with our environment. So we're going to slow down how much we process our senses and how much energy we're giving them and how much attention we're giving them. And so that melatonin thing has been satisfied, right? Because of we had to have the blue light gone, but now that melatonin thing's been satisfied, we know we can make enough melatonin. The GABA is in there to help give us that boost because we aren't spending 3 hours getting ready for bed. We're spending an hour maybe getting ready for bed. So we're just let's just put that in you as though you spent 3 hours. Like that's the whole idea. Like nothing lasts in there for more than a couple of hours. And then there's an amino acid that helps GABA work better in the brain. called L-theanine, and so that's in there. And then just recently, because of some research that's been going on around a nutrient called phosphatidylserine that actually lowers stress hormones.
Yeah.
It's not huge. I mean, it's you 10 to 30%, depending on how much you're taking and your sensitivities to it and all that other stuff. So that's all that's in the supplement. Like it truly is a nutritional supplement. Like I think of it, it's supplemental. The ideal thing would be to like live ideally and spend 3 hours getting ready for bed and eat a great diet and exercise, or whatever. And nobody does all of that. So it's like, between reality and ideal, we supplement, and then and so that's the idea behind it. So you supplement there, and make sure that your body has all the nutrients. You make sure you get there's a very, very, very small amount of melatonin in there, because I don't want to take over your melatonin production or slow down your melatonin production. I want to just to give you a dusting of it to initiate, and then I have all the nutrients so that your brain can keep making it. And then a little bit of GABA. Again, I don't want to completely crush you with GABA. I don't want to shut your brain off. That's how the sleep drugs work. I just want to give you a little bit of GABA to kind of get things going. And then your brain has to keep everything going. So there's nothing in there that like makes you sleepy technically. There's just things in there that will enhance your body's ability to go to sleep if you're doing something close to good sleep hygiene. You could, like, I could take it right now in the middle of the day and like keep doing podcasts and go work out and whatever, never notice that I took it. There would be zero effect. So you have to be doing the other stuff right. And that's it. Like that's all there is to the sleep supplement.
Awesome.
Nothing sexy or fancy or tricky. It's just really the nutrients that you need. It's like, and every, like, even when you sleep great, you sleep better with it. Even like I've never had any problems with sleep other than I didn't think I needed it. I spent like 10 years probably sleeping 4 hours a night. But now, like, for the last 20 years, like I sleep at least 8 hours a night. Like but I feel better when I take my own supplement. I forget to take it. I run out of it, if you can believe that. Like I'll run out of it for months and forget to reorder it. And then I take it again. I'm like, geez, what was I thinking? Like, I feel so much better. Why don't I do this every night?
That's awesome. Well, Dr. Parsley, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to put all of this in the show notes along with your sleep guide, which I think is going to be huge for people. They're going to eat that up. So we appreciate you so much for coming on and taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah. Thank you. Like I said, I appreciate the soapbox. Okay.
Thanks everyone for listening.
We hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, if you can pop over and leave a review, that would be awesome. You can also find us over at healthbabes.com, where you can find our courses, our latest book. We also are on Instagram at The Health Babes, at Dr. Becky Campbell, or at Dr. Crystal Hone. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.